A warm welcome to everybody within the Budapest premises of Fuga, but also beyond, especially in Vienna. So thank you for joining us at this late evening hour. I'm representing here the Hungarian team, actually 4 co-authors who have worked a lot on collecting data for this specific presentation so that we can share the housing consequences of green policies in Hungary. Let's start. We will be 3 speakers. I will start with a few introductory slides, then Ivan Tosic, the lead of this project, will take over and talk about the international examples and processes we found most relevant to contrast the Hungarian case too. And those cases will be presented by Eva Gerőházy and Julia Szabo. She will not talk, but she was the one who was assisting us in the whole data collection process and in the interviews in the past half year. So just a few words about the ReHousing Horizon Europe project. I think as this is the 4th in the series of public lectures, most of it has been mentioned in the previous videos you can also watch on our YouTube channel. But I think what is also always important to remember is that the setting why this research was launched is a very dynamic one. So we witnessed a few crises, a financial crisis, climate crisis, wars, conflicts, and at the same time there's a pretty conscious and ambitious EU green transition agenda which tries to put processes forward which are many times in contradiction with those contextual factors. But we also understand, and this is sort of a shared knowledge, that housing inequalities seem to be partly linked to the green transition, meaning that there are social groups who benefit more and those who benefit less from the processes, or even are put into more vulnerable positions. So where this project comes in is especially this conflicting point, so that we can better understand what makes these processes be more affecting select groups, in what context and why. So we want to understand not just the processes, but also what mitigation mechanisms are there that sort of present a break in such processes, or can divert the directions of these transitions. So we focus on 3 very specific intervention times linked with the green transition: energy retrofitting, nature-based solutions, and densification. These are urban processes. All of the case studies center around one or multiple from these types of interventions, where we also always have to acknowledge that these are also oftentimes interrelated changes in the urban fabric. We want to understand how housing inequalities emerge. We also develop different measurements around it. We want to understand where renoviction emerges, in what governance context that's happening. We also have a set of tools to explore green gentrification, but also adapting sort of the definitions to local context. And at the end of the day, we want to understand why displacement of poorer households is happening or is not happening in this context where we work. That QR code leads you to the ReHousing website, so where you can actually explore more. There's a lot of available studies already, because now sort of in the middle of the whole project. So just to come back to the very first statement, obviously when we talk about housing inequalities in an EU context, we tend to say that the EU doesn't have any impact on housing directly. But then if one looks into the processes and into the context and into the regulations, one will very quickly find that indirectly there are a lot of tools which do have a strong impact. Ivan will talk about those in detail. This is just a brief list that the EU does have a considerable impact through its renovation wave agenda and related directives, which are bounding for the member states, and also through policies like the biodiversity efforts and the non-Atlantic, which effectively showcase how then the urban responses to changes can be shaped. What we also find is that, and this is why we love working together in these 9 countries, is that the outcomes of these processes vary considerably, which does have a lot to do with the number of components and mechanisms. And we want to understand the level, why they work out like that. So we work in 9 countries, as told. You can see them here on the map. It's Austria, so Hellovi and his team, France, Hungary, Italy, Norway, Poland, Spain, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. And in all countries, there are 3 different cases with different settings. The territorial focus is designed so that we can understand better issues and processes in attractive and high housing market pressure areas, which normally would mean the capital cities or larger urban hubs. Then we also wanted to understand what's happening in middle-sized cities. You will learn that that's why Veszprém is the Hungarian case, and then also in rural areas where we went to very small cities to understand their context and the mechanisms and processes there. We apply a mixed method project design. We have a lot of investigations behind us, quantitative data analysis, qualitative data analysis, document analysis, and there's also a little bit of a modeling of segregation, which is so that we can understand what's happening in terms of green gentrification. We also explored environmental policy instruments and how they emerged, and what is the pathway that they sort of make us anticipate in the urban context. And most recently, we had, and this is actually, I think, what Ivan will talk a lot about, what the perceptions of the processes are by the public and by the key stakeholders in these areas. So we did a lot of interviews with representatives of residents in the condominiums, but also within municipalities and those who want to invest into housing, so that we can understand their positions as well. And so just to give the word to Ivan, all these cases try to grasp what fuels and what protects. So these are those 2 mechanisms, as we always want to understand what impacts that gentrification, green gentrification is happening, displacement is happening, or what represents barrier, so that the market overrules everything. And there are a few components where we specifically are interested in, and we try to develop an argumentation about these processes, and these are these components. So we want to understand the differences according to tenure forms, financial and social regulations, including taxation, including financial incentives of these investments, and of course the general housing market conditions as such. And of course, given that we are going to talk about projects to you, we were also very much interested how initiator or investors work within such context. What can they achieve, and what is their interest in shaping urban fabric accordingly? I think that's it. Ivan, your turn.
So a few words about the international examples and about the basic concepts we are investigating. You see a city on the left-hand side which is not very green, and then you see something which is very green. Now, obviously, we love what is green. But are the same people getting the green who are on the left-hand side, or is this green for someone else? Let's talk first about energy retrofitting. This is the housing retrofitting. This is the energy efficient renovation of residential buildings. Of course, the improvement of energy use is quite good for the nature, for the built environment. It also lessens the greenhouse gas emission, and it also helps to handle energy poverty. For this reason, in EU policies, in the EU climate governance, energy retrofitting is one of the central pillars, and energy performance building directive, energy efficiency directive, etc. They are all EU policies which are compulsory for the national level. So if there are decisions made on the EU level, and if it is a directive, this directive has to be performed on the national level. In all cases, basically they are financial tools which are subsidies, grants, or tax deductions, which aim to mobilize the resources of the homeowners, of landlords, and social housing providers to achieve energy retrofitting. Now, first time I met something which was shocking was in The Hague. In The Hague, you see on the left-hand side a social housing, I would say, estate. The housing association manager told us very proudly that these houses will not exist anymore next year. They demolish all these houses because they are outdated from energy perspective, and they will be rebuilt with the housing which is on the right-hand side. And I was the only one who asked, why do you have to demolish this housing? Couldn't you have improved it energetically? And they said, no, energy is so important, we have to demolish. So what I met in this situation was that maybe these tenants, they will get a replacement housing, but even then, there was a brutal intervention under the heading of energy. Now, if it is not in the public market, but in the private market, then it can be even more dangerous. If you are a private tenant all over Europe or in most countries, there is a kind of protection for the yearly rent increase, but there is usually no protection if the tenant changes. And usually the landlords are using this opportunity. They want to achieve the change of the tenants, so they just announce, I have to renovate the building, and then they get the permission, the tenant is out, and then the next tenant can pay 2 or 3 times higher rent. This is called, from a combination of renovation and eviction, renoviction. The reason of the renovation is, in fact, the wish of the landlord to change the tenant. And this is a cartoon from Canada. In Canada, there is a huge literature about this. The developers are coming and they are just taking out the poor people from the houses. The houses will be somewhat renovated, but then the new tenants have to pay 2 or 3 times higher rent. So renoviction has a huge literature in Canada, but it is also well known in some of the Western countries. The rehousing case, a related case, is in Paris, Orgue de Flandre, which is a housing estate built in the 1970s in Paris. It started to decline. And this slide, which I will not go into the details now, shows the story that the public sector can do something to protect people. The city of Paris gave a lot of public subsidies, and there is also a national program of the national agency. And in this way, they renovated the buildings. Part of the buildings were privately owned, part of the buildings were by social housing providers, and the public subsidies were at least 50% of the costs. And in this regard, they managed to achieve that rents did not increase. So it is possible to make a energy retrofitting and avoiding eviction, but this costs a lot to the public. Let's take the second case, which is densification of cities. You know that there are EU rules that we should not take new greenfield areas. If you are in a city which is expanding, then you have to densify the city. You have to rebuild the existing housing stock. And the densification of the existing urban fabric is a fantastic, a very interesting topic. I, as a sociologist, I really love this story because it's full with contradictions. A potential tension is with the housing need. There is also the green belt issue, which is some people say that the green belts are against housing construction, and there are very many potential environmental and social externalities. Now, the environmental externalities can be seen on this cartoon. This is a Polish cartoon. People move into the first house, and they are happy that they have a flat with park view. Then the estate is continuing, and then the next houses are built. And finally, people are getting into a flat. They hoped to have a park view, but they only have a view on those who hoped to have a park view, and the park is gone. So these are the environmental, potential environmental consequences of densification. But what are the social consequences? And here we have quite nice examples from our colleagues of Zurich. Zurich is a city which goes for densification, and the Zurich research shows that if houses, buildings are demolished, then you can see that these buildings which are demolished here probably were not in the worst condition. They are rebuilt with new buildings, and then the tenants or the owners of the new building are a totally different social class. And what is also interesting, they tried to densify. More housing units have been built, but these housing units are used by the middle class families in a different way. They consume more square meter per capita. So you did not really achieve a densification regarding square meter per capita. Not to talk about the waste which is produced. And then the Zurich research shows that people had to move out from Zurich whose houses were demolished. And this is the rehousing case in Zurich, Altstetten. And this is a picture about the buildings which will be demolished. I would say that these buildings could be happily accepted in any city of Hungary. This is really a private development area. You can understand that if Zurich increased the zoning by one more floor, and this is what they did because they want to have a denser city, then the developers will demolish this housing and will build new housing which is one floor more, but then all the rental contracts are broken and the new rents are much, much higher. Finally, the nature-based solutions. Again, who would deny that green is nice? But what are then the consequences? And the EU loves the nature-based solutions. They said that this is making our cities more attractive. This is restoring degraded ecosystems, developing climate change adaptation, etc., etc. I will show you one example from Stockholm, a part of Stockholm which was a rundown, polluted industrial site, and this was rebuilt as an eco-city for 25,000 residents, and all promises were given to have a water, energy, and waste sustainable, most modern technologies, and also keep the general social structure of Stockholm. And this is what they did, and you can see that these pictures are really quite nice. This is a fantastic new eco-neighborhood. But what are the consequences? The consequences is that they could not achieve the social structure what existed in Stockholm. Prices went up because of the high environmental standards. Units became very expensive, and in fact, much less poor people are living here. Finally, it was called a bourgeois environmentalism. So it is a nice ecosystem, eco-city, but it is not for those people what the city wanted to achieve. So they did not really achieve what they wanted. And these are a few pictures about Oslo. You can see these fantastic green interventions, and our colleagues in Oslo can show in detail how what kind of social consequences these interventions have. And as you can see, I love cartoons. You can see that in this area where the changes are starting, you will see totally different behavior, totally different shops, and totally different people going on the street. The rehousing case, which is about this kind of changes, nature-based solutions, is a case in Barcelona. which made a fantastic improvement in one of the rundown areas, industrial areas of the city. I visited this area. They're really a fantastic park, and also a building which is used as playgrounds and sport facilities. Our colleagues in Barcelona show to what extent the rental prices went up, and there is a danger that this area will also densify, because the city is unable to deliver the public and cooperative housing which they promised that they will also deliver in this part of the city. So I think these were the international examples, just showing the dilemma. And now we go to Hungary.
Okay, then let's come home and see how these changes can be observed in Hungary and what we have experienced through our interview processes. As it was mentioned by Nora, the logic of the research is that in each country, so each 9 countries, we made interviews and also data collection in major cities, in one major city, in a middle-sized city, and in a small city. In our case, the major city, but a surprise, it was Budapest. The secondary city was Veszprém, and the small city was Ajka. But currently, we will not talk about all the inspections we have made, but we try to concentrate on some certain aspects of the research in order to try to find some major observations that can be compared to the international statements. So practically, I will concentrate on a kind of comparative assessment of housing estate building renovation processes in Budapest, in Kelenföld housing estate, and also in Veszprém, we concentrated on Utasi housing estate, and in Ajka, where we try to capture all the central housing estate area. And then I will speak about a specific soft regeneration project, which many of the Hungarian colleagues already know in details. This is about the Magdolna Quarter, which is in District 8 of Budapest. We call it Józsefváros. So, but in order to have some background, and mainly for the international students and the ones who will see the recordings, some words about the housing policy and the housing conditions in Hungary. It might be surprising for many Western European colleagues that Hungary is a super-ownership country. We all know that. Practically, and there is a chart on that, you can capture that on a national level, practically, let's say, 98% of the residential units are privately owned. In Budapest, it's a little bit lower, so it's about 93, 94. In Veszprém, it's 99. And in Ajka, it's also about 98%, which is privately owned. So the rest is social housing, or let's say municipally owned housing, but also there are some small portion, which is, we call it other, owned by whoever. With regard to the private rental sector, where the renoviction, which is a very important phenomenon, can be really followed mostly, we rather have only guesses on that practically. Of course, in the census, there are data about the share of private rental sector, but it is important to know for the international colleagues that here in Hungary, as the private rental sector is not regulated, prices and rents are not regulated, it also means that there is a very high share of gray private rental sector without any official contracts. So practically, no one knows, even throughout the census, the share. So we have rather estimations, considering that probably in Budapest, it might be around 15-20%. However, in Veszprém, it might be lower, around 10-15%, and in Ajka, it might be 5-10%. But what is very important, that it is a ownership and owner occupation dominated housing sector, which is, in case of multifamily buildings, which is all around the country, stands about 40% of the housing units. Of course, in major cities like in Budapest it's 84% of the housing units are in multi-family buildings, and these buildings are run by condominiums and cooperatives. Condominium is a very well-known phenomenon. There are the private owners who negotiate all the decisions, and practically they own their apartments and share in the condominium building. A cooperative is also very similar to a condominium. It's very strange for many Western European colleagues. The cooperative is not a cooperative of, I don't know, Vienna, like in Budapest. Cooperative, in case of a cooperative, the private units are owned by the owners, by the persons living there, practically, and the cooperative is owning the common parts of the buildings. Cooperatives usually consist of more than one building, sometimes one building, but usually more than one building. And they said to be more professional because they were originally established as cooperatives from the beginning, from their construction. So practically the people who are living there, they were owners all the time. However, in case of condominiums, they were mostly created throughout the privatization process. So in the 90s, in the beginning of the 90s, they were rather municipal tenants that got or could buy their units on a very low price, which means that condominiums, which are usually run by contracted private management companies, seem to have, in general, a little bit less professional and usually have less, reserves to accumulate because it's based on one building and not a bigger building stock. It's also a very important thing that local municipalities here in Hungary have, on the one hand, a role in running municipal housing stock, which, as I mentioned to you, in nationwide it's about 2-3%. In Budapest, it's a little bit above 4%. So it's a restricted amount, and they are also responsible for local allowances, including kind of housing allowance, which amount is very restricted. So practically, it doesn't really help maintaining and operating the units. So these are specificities with regard to the Hungarian housing stock. And some words about the energy. I wouldn't say the energy policy. It's about when we are speaking about the renovation of privately owned buildings, what we can rely on. The state provides for us as condominiums, cooperatives, family houses. What is also very important to know that here in Hungary, there is an energy, rather say utility price cap from 2013, which means that the electricity, the gas and district heating prices, so everything which goes through the grid, was practically frozen on 2013 price. It was a little bit released in 2022 in August, which means that practically the ones who consume over the so-called average should pay much more. In case of gas, it's 7 times more than the restricted price. But the ones which are below the average, which at that time was about 75% of the population, they still remain on the 2013 price level. It is very important, meaning that when you make any energy efficient intervention, the payoff period of your intervention can be measured in decades. It doesn't really incentivize you for making any interventions because it will never pay off. With regard to the subsidies that you can get from the retrofitting, there was a panel rehabilitation program from 2001 till practically the financial crisis, 2009. It appeared once in 2015, and practically the end of 2010s, there were mainly from EU funds subsidized loans, practically also for family houses and for a small proportion for multifamily buildings, but the amount was very restricted and getting it was very complicated. And practically nowadays, for multifamily buildings, there is practically nothing else than subsidized loan. It's a subsidized interest rate loan, which exists from, I think, 1988, so even from socialist times. This is, as I mentioned, an interest rate subsidy, but it's based on, for the first 5 years, it's, I think, 70% of the interest, and the next 5 years, it's 35% of the interest. but it's based on a volatile, really basis renovation loan, which the buildings can get as joint loans. So not the ones, not the private owners get the loans, but the building itself. What we rely on currently as Hungary is fond of market-based solutions in retrofitting currently. This is the energy efficiency obligation scheme, which is very similar to the emission trading system that's already here and might come even in the second phase, which means that energy providers are obliged to implement energy saving interventions. It becomes very efficient nowadays after changing the regulations. It started in 2021, I think. But probably you have seen that in the last year, there is a series of attic renovation processes throughout the countries. I think they already renovated, insulated the attic of 100,000 family houses. Not more than that. Practically only family houses are affected by this. It's a market-based solution, but it will stop now because the quotas are just dying out. And the last source that I wanted to mention, it will be very important in case of the Magdolna Quarter. This is the social rehabilitation program, which also started in Hungary, but then was financed also by the European Union at the end of the 2000s, practically. Okay, then let's see the cases, which I would like to compare. There will be 3 housing estates, and I would like to highlight the similarities and the differences between them with regard to the renovation processes. With regard to Kelenföld, Budapest, you all know it's in 11th district. This is a relatively high prestige district located in the western southern gate of Budapest. Practically, the values there, the real estate values is constantly increasing because of the intervention in the district itself. And with regard to Kelenföld, the specific housing estate, there are not really new constructions in this housing estate, but about 2/3 of the buildings are already insulated. This is very visible when you go there. But there are not really new constructions there, with regard to the residential sector, but you all know there is an extended tram line there, there is an extended metro line there is a new shopping mall there. So practically, the amenities around this area improved a lot in the last 10 years. And the local municipality, even from the beginning of the 2000s, where the panel rehabilitation program was issued by the state, which provided 1/3 of the cost by the state, 1/3 by the municipality, and 1/3 had to be provided by the owners. And this 1/3 was also paid from subsidized loans, plus the housing savings schemes. So at the end of the day, it was 80% subsidy for the buildings. So in that time, this local municipality really played a very active role in encouraging the buildings and helping them and providing, of course, the municipal share, but also providing technical knowledge. So this whole panel rehabilitation process started very strongly in this housing estate. And then what is very important, that it slowly continued on. So even if there was not as much subsidy after 2009, only once in 2015, throughout using the housing savings schemes and the subsidized loans, it continued up to a certain extent. So when we made interviews with the housing managers, it turned out that in case of cooperatives, in case of the ones with, having shops, for example, in their basement, which they can rent out, so they had reserves, slowly they could continue on the renovation process part. It's not a complex renovation, but at least partial insulation, change of common areas, windows, and things like that. So something is going on, and of course, the local municipality makes a lot of things to improve the green areas, what you can see in the picture. What happens in Ajka, the small city? Probably you know that Ajka is famous for completing, nearly 90% of the multifamily buildings were renovated up to a certain extent. I think they are the winners on national level, probably, in this regard. This is relatively small city. with a decreasing and aging population. But still, as I mentioned to you, the renovation rate is very high. But let's see what's behind this high renovation rate. One thing, the most important thing that the mayor, which practically the same from 2010, and he was also the head of the council in the socialist time. You remember this is very common to be a very strong leader. So he is very keen on the renovation process, not for energy saving reasons primarily. It's more about, comfort and nice looking city. And for that, the municipality provided their own share for the state subsidy all the time. And when there was no state subsidy, they themselves created their subsidy scheme, and it was 50%. So I think it's relatively high subsidy rate that they applied. But what was the price of it? And these are the two things that the two pictures can show you the difference. The first one on the upper side, it's an insulated building. It was made from probably state funds. The one on the lower side, it's a painted building. Because the ones that are subsidized from local resources, there was not must to insulate. There was not must to change the windows up to a certain technical standard. So the technical requirements lowered a lot. In order that when you currently go to Ajka, also there are a lot of green investments. This is a lovely town, really. It looks very nice. And people are really devoted to the renovation process. However, in 2014, there was the last call from the municipality, and it's still not evaluated because the municipality ran out of money. So in the last decade, practically it took a lot of loan from the commercial market, the municipality, to finance this whole process. But currently, municipalities in Hungary are dried out financially. Also Ajka. So how the process stopped, because there is no municipal fund, there is no renovation happening at all. So it is 100% tied to the subsidy of the municipality. And what happens in Veszprém? In Veszprém, Jutosi estate, it's the biggest housing estate in Veszprém. I think about 1/3 of the population lives there. Mainly 10-story high buildings are located there, and about 10% of this housing estate was already renovated. Veszprém has a very nice location. It's 10 kilometers, I think, from Lake Balaton. It has a touristic attraction. Its economy is strong. So it was astonishing also for us that their prices, real estate prices, are nearly as high as in Budapest. However, the salaries are not as much high. On the other hand, so affordability of housing, it's even worse than in Budapest. The estate was partially renovated, mainly in the panel 2000s. But what is interesting, as the municipality was not keen on to provide any additional help after the state fund terminated, the process also stopped. It was very interesting to have a conversation with the property managers, and they complained that practically thinking about complex energy efficient renovation is something that is, it's impossible to do. They are really starting to make the everyday maintenance of the buildings. And thinking about renovation, energy efficient renovation, without any major subsidies, it's practically out of mind of the local communities. So if we compare the three estates, what we can draw as a quick conclusion, that retrofitting and efficient complex retrofitting processes are really generated primarily by subsidies. So it's not something that just comes from a green, green mind of people. If there is no subsidy, at least some kind of, then practically energy efficient renovations and mainly complex renovation will not happen. And the question is, which level of subsidy and which level of renovation? What we have seen is that when there is a high level of state subsidy and local subsidy, there might be high technical expectations. There is a high upfront cost because of that high subsidy, but it means it seems to work. This is what the panel program showed us. When we are thinking about Ajka's program, so there is a low technical standard, moderate costs, low subsidy, it still might work. I mean, 90% is painted and insulated in Ajka with a 50% subsidy rate and moderate expectations with regard to the technical content. But what happens, which is the current case, when there are no state funds available for multifamily buildings, so practically there are no technical expectations based on the tenders, which means moderate costs, very low subsidy, there is only an interest-free loan. It means that it might work under certain conditions, and this is what we have seen in Kelenföld, but it doesn't work most of the cases. It doesn't work in Ajka, it doesn't work in Veszprém. It works in certain buildings in Kelenföld, but it doesn't move the country if this is the condition. So this was the housing estate part, and then two slides about Magdolna, which you know very much, I'm sure. But for the general audience, Magdolna Quarter is the most marginalized part of Józsefváros, District 8 of Budapest, which district has a kind of stamp, let's say, that it had really huge social problems in the past. I mean, in the last 200 years. So it's a traditional problem. It changed a lot. So and not only the quarter itself didn't change as much, but the district itself changed a lot because there were certain renovations. You know, of course, it's very, very famous, the Corvin part that was completely rebuilt. But for Magdolna Quarter, the whole concept was different. So it was rather a step-by-step renovation. As I have written it here, there was a 3.5 waves of social rehabilitations. There were 3 official waves of social rehabilitation between 2005 and 2015. And then Magdolna Quarter was also part of the Magdolna Orci social rehabilitation from 2018 and 2023, which only affected part of the Magdolna Quarter and the whole area of the neighboring quarter, so-called Orci Quarter. And what happened in the framework of this complex social rehabilitation, that approximately 26 municipal buildings were renewed up to a certain extent. I think about 2-3 municipal buildings were also constructed, so new ones. About 16 condominiums were partially renovated, so privately owned condominiums. There was a traffic reduction system implemented. The main square, which there is a photo of one of them, Mátyás Square, was renewed in several waves. I mean, it was reconstructed several times as a very nice community green area. And also community gardens, green courtyards, small-scale street gardening, greening had happened. And of course, what might have been the heart of the social rehabilitation process, a new community center was opened up, and a lot of social interventions were made in order to help the residents themselves, to equip with them social skills, education improvement, labor market improvement. A lot of programs like this were implemented. And also for the small plots, empty plots, some private new buildings were created. So this is how the whole area from 2005 in the last 2 decades were restructured. Let's see the results. I mentioned in the beginning that there was a very strong political intention that this quarter should be very different from the neighboring quarter, which was totally rebuilt. The major issue was here that to stop the further marginalization of the area, but still avoid gentrification. It's, I think, balancing this is really a very tricky thing. It seems, and what is also very important, that even in the last 2 decades, there were different political considerations. Probably you know that in the beginning of this period, from 2005 to 2009, and also now from 2019, there is a rather left-wingish leadership of the municipality. And in the 2000s, there was the right-wingish leadership. And the approach for renovation and rehabilitation was also very different. In the left-wing part, more about municipal buildings were in the focus of the renovation, and more about social interventions and working together with the residents. It was very much in the focus. And this is also in the focus now, without state funding and without EU funding, but still it has a very strong social approach. In the 2000s, it was more about condominium renovation, public space renovation, more about the facade, more about what can be seen on the streets, what can be seen from the buildings. So the focus was different even in the last 2 decades. But what was also very interesting when we made interviews with NGO people, residents, property managers, not really substantial social changes in the area in the last 20 years. However, this is expected that it will come soon, because probably they have reached that specific edge of this balancing turning point where it will be very complicated to stop the strong gentrification process. And what I also wanted to put here, these are 2 quotations about the social change, and you can see the 2 point of views that can be followed from this. From a representative of an NGO, they say that there were not strong social changes. These are still the same Roma families sitting in Mátyás Square. The old communities remained in their original forms. So hooray, no social change. The other opinion from a housing manager is that the people remain the same. There are families in each building that are hard to handle. The community is relieved if some of them go to jail. So practically the same thing, that there were not really important social changes or significant social changes, might be evaluated differently from different perspectives. And now the last slide is about, based on the housing estate pattern and the pattern of Magdolna, what we think, how the 2 major terms that were highlighted by Ivan from the international examples of the danger of green investment causing either renoviction or green gentrification. Whether we think it happens in Hungary. With regard to renoviction, that there is a specific interpretation of this thing in an owner-occupied housing system, as practically we do not know what's happening in the private rental market. In the interviews with housing managers, we've heard that some of the private landlords might put the renovation costs on the tenants, some of them may not, but no one knows. It's really a hidden information, a hidden sector. I mean, private renters are moving around. No one can really follow them, why they are moving out, why they are moving in. Don't have really much information on that. The question is whether in an owner-occupation sector, if there is a renovation, whether there is a high cost increase in order to finance the renovation loan installments or the upfront cost or something, whether this extra payment created any problems, accumulation of arrears or something like that made some of the families to be evicted because of the rise of the costs. And what we really experienced from our interviews, that practically none of the interviewees could mention any of these cases. So extra evictions, extra arrears didn't really appear because of the renovation process itself. We think that there are 2 major causes behind that, might be. One of them is the high subsidy level, meaning that the payment that they have to pay for the renovation was relatively moderate. And the other thing is the community decision mechanism in cooperatives and condominiums. So even the majority, 50% of the people who are present in a valid General Assembly can decide on the renovation. Usually they don't really go to a to a decision that would put too much burden even on the minority. Because if it happens and arrears accumulate, then the majority have to pay the costs. So practically inside this whole condominium and cooperative system, there is an inbuilt negotiations scheme which lowers the risk of non-payment in order to try to balance the payment capacity of different residents living in the building. So that's why we think that we didn't really experience a renoviction thing. And with regard to green gentrification, what we have found is there is gentrification happening in many places. I mean, in Kelenföld housing estate, even in Magdolna, it's happening slowly. In decades, it's happening. But what we found is that green seemed not to have the primary cause behind. It might be an additional cause, a small, top on the cake, but not a major cause. The major cause seemed to be rather bigger urban transformations. In case of Kelenföld, as I mentioned to you, new tram lines, new metro lines, new shopping mall, a lot of things. In case of Magdolna, what we really experienced is, and also it was made one of the interviewees, that District 8 is the new District 7, which tells something only to people in Budapest, meaning that as the housing market of Budapest has changed and it's just re-evaluating and it's becoming less and less affordable, the prices are going up. I mean, the sharpest price increase happened in Budapest, even throughout Europe. It means that practically those areas that were not really desirable before are the ones that are affordable at the end of the day. So practically young intellectuals, people who just finished their university courses and things like that cannot afford more than Magdolna, than these areas of Budapest. So practically the whole housing, the place of Magdolna in the whole housing system was re-evaluated. And also there are a lot of interventions, planning around Magdolna in North Quarter as well, new university buildings, for example, which means that there is a need for student housing for professors and things like that around the area. And it means that there will be higher pressure and higher demand for Magdolna as well. Not because of greening, not because of retrofitting, just because of the changes that are happening around this area. So I would like to close with this very short observation and hope to get some inquiries, questions from the colleagues from Vienna and different parts of the world.